You're sitting there, hands on the wheel, trying to look calm while your mind is quietly racing. The question comes out in a relaxed tone, almost friendly, like it doesn't matter at all. So, where are you coming from? No pressure, no urgency. Just a simple question that feels like small talk. But here's the part nobody tells you. That one answer can quietly shape everything that happens next. Let me ask you something honestly. When a cop asks you that question, do you answer quickly without thinking, or do you pause and consider what you're actually saying? Drop your answer in the comments because most people respond on autopilot, and that's exactly where the problem starts. Go ahead, write your answer first. Because once you understand what's really happening in that moment, you'll never hear that question the same way again. Most drivers assume that question is just part of the routine, a way for the officer to break the silence, maybe ease the tension. It feels human, normal, almost polite, but from the officer's perspective, it serves a very specific purpose. It's not about your destination. It's not even about your past location. It's about building a timeline. The moment you speak, you're giving them a starting point, a piece of information that can be measured, compared, and sometimes challenged. And here's what makes it tricky. You don't get to control how that information is interpreted once it's out there. Let's slow this down and really understand what's happening. When you say, "I'm coming from work," that sounds harmless. But now the officer has something to evaluate. What time is it? Does your appearance match that claim? Is your route consistent with that statement? Does your behavior align with someone who just finished a shift? If even one small detail doesn't line up, it creates a gap. And in law enforcement, gaps are invitations to look deeper, not proof, not guilt, just a reason to keep going. And that's where situations quietly start to escalate. Here's something most people underestimate. You don't need to lie to create suspicion. You just need to be slightly inconsistent. Maybe you say you're coming from a friend's house. Later, you mention stopping somewhere else first. That's not a crime. It's normal human behavior. But now your story has layers, and layers create questions. Or maybe you answer too fast, without thinking, and later realize you phrased something poorly. Now you're trying to correct yourself. And suddenly, what should have been a simple answer feels uncertain. From your perspective, you're just clarifying. From the officer's perspective, your story is shifting. And once that perception forms, it doesn't easily go away. This is where people start to feel that subtle change in the interaction. The tone becomes slightly more serious. The questions become more specific. The officer might take a longer pause before responding. Most drivers don't notice why that shift happened. They just feel it. And by then, the situation has already moved into a different category. Let me give you a realistic scenario that plays out more often than people realize. You're pulled over late at night. The officer asks where you're coming from. You casually say, "Just from dinner." Seems simple, right? But now, think about how many variables are tied to that one sentence. What restaurant? How long were you there? Did you have anything to drink? Who were you with? What time did you leave? You didn't mention any of that, but your answer opened the door to all of it. And if the officer decides to walk through that door, you're now in a situation where every follow-up question is built on your original statement. This is how people unintentionally create pressure for themselves, not because they did something wrong, but because they gave more than they needed to. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Many drivers believe that answering everything will make the stop end faster. That being cooperative means being talkative. That's one of the biggest misunderstandings I see. There's a difference between cooperation and overexposure. Cooperation means providing what is legally required, your identification, your documents, basic compliance with instructions. That's it. Overexposure is when you start filling silence with unnecessary details, hoping it makes you look more trustworthy. But trust, in that moment, is not built by talking more. It's built by consistency. And the more you say, the harder it becomes to stay perfectly consistent under pressure. That's just human nature. Let me ask you this. Have you ever told a story and then, halfway through, realized you forgot a small detail or said something slightly off? Now, imagine that happening during a traffic stop, where every word matters more than you think. That's the risk most people don't see. Now, I'm not telling you to be difficult. I'm not telling you to create tension or act defensive. In fact, the opposite is true. The most effective approach is calm, controlled, and intentional. When a question goes beyond what's required, you have a choice. And that choice doesn't have to be dramatic. A simple, respectful response like, "I'd rather not answer any questions," changes the entire dynamic without escalating the situation. Notice how that sounds. It's not aggressive, it's not confrontational, it's clear but calm. And that matters more than people realize, because tone is everything in these interactions. If you sound defensive, it raises tension. If you sound controlled, it signals awareness. And officers are trained to read that difference instantly. Let's go deeper into how they're actually thinking in that moment. They're not just listening to your words, they're watching everything. Your hands, your movements, your eye contact, the speed of your responses. Even how your breathing changes when certain questions are asked. That's the real evaluation happening. So, when you answer a question like, "Where are you coming from?" you're not just giving information. You're also giving a behavioral signal. Are you confident? Are you hesitant? Are you overly detailed? Are you trying too hard to explain? Each of those signals leads to a different interpretation. And here's something most people never consider. Once an officer develops a theory about what's going on, they start looking for confirmation. Not intentionally in a biased way, but naturally. It's how human thinking works. If your answer suggests one thing, they'll look for signs that support it. If your behavior suggests another, they'll explore that instead. Your initial response helps shape that direction. That's why this moment is more important than it seems. Now, let's talk about a mistake that can turn a simple stop into something much bigger. Trying to talk your way out of it. People think if they explain enough, if they sound reasonable enough, if they add context, the officer will just let them go. Sometimes that happens, but other times it has the opposite effect. Because every additional sentence increases the chances of inconsistency. And once inconsistency appears, the stop often extends. More questions, more observation, sometimes even requests for consent to search. And here's where things can escalate quickly without people realizing it. Consent. Most drivers don't understand how casually they give it. It doesn't always sound like a clear yes. Sometimes it's hesitation. Sometimes it's uncertainty. Sometimes it's a phrase like, I guess that's okay. But once it's given, the situation changes immediately. And often, that moment traces back to earlier in the conversation, to how open you were, how much you shared, how the officer interpreted your behavior. Everything connects. That's why the smartest approach is not about saying the perfect sentence. It's about understanding when not to say anything unnecessary. Because silence, when used correctly, is not suspicious. It's controlled. There's a difference. Now, let's address something I know many people are thinking. What if staying quiet makes things worse? It's a fair question, and the answer depends entirely on how you do it. If you shut down completely, avoid eye contact, or act defensive, yes, that can raise tension. But if you remain calm, respectful, and composed, while simply choosing not to answer optional questions, that creates a very different impression. You're not resisting, you're not arguing, you're just not volunteering. And that distinction is powerful, because at the end of the day, a traffic stop is not just about what you did before the officer pulled you over. It's also about what happens after, what you say, how you say it, what you choose to share, and most importantly, what you choose to hold back. So the next time you hear that question, don't treat it like small talk. Understand what it really is, a starting point, a test of consistency, a moment where your words can quietly build a path you didn't intend to create. And once that path starts forming, it becomes much harder to step off it. That's why awareness matters more than anything. Not fear, not anxiety, just awareness. Because when you understand the structure of that interaction, you stop reacting automatically. You start responding intentionally. And that's the difference between a situation that stays simple and one that slowly turns into something much more complicated than it ever needed to be.